Welcome back to Dive into the Psalms, where each week we cover a different psalm and we dive into just the context of it, the meaning of it, the depth of it, usually from a Sunday morning message that Brett or someone has covered on a Sunday morning here at Sardinia Church of Christ. For those of you who don't know us, my name is Marion Clifton. I'm the student minister here at Sardinia Church of Christ, and this is Brett. He's the senior minister, so most of the content's covered by him. Coming weeks, you're going to hear from a couple other people as well. But yeah, welcome back. Today we're covering Psalm 90. Do you want to go a little bit into the background and then we'll dive in?
Sure thing. So, Psalm 90, we are now into book 4 of the Psalms. The Psalms are divided into 5 books, and book 4 starts with Psalm 90 and goes through Psalm 106. And so, Psalm 90 is the first psalm in book 4. We'll come back to that in a moment. But the authorship is, for the most part, most scholars agree it's ascribed to Moses. And so there's really good evidence to believe that Moses, who was the leader of the Israelite nation, brought them out of Egypt, the whole story in Exodus. Moses authored the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and we also have here Psalm 90. So it was most likely written late in Moses' life, during the period where they are wandering through the wilderness, wilderness of Sinai, trying to make their way toward the land of Canaan, the Promised Land. But a lot of scholars agree that it was possibly written in the wake of a death for in Moses' family. So whether that was his brother Aaron or his sister Miriam, or maybe right after both of them, they died probably within about a year of each other. And so the temporary, frail nature of human life is fresh on Moses' mind. This psalm is also a prayer. So a lot of the psalms that we have looked at over the first several weeks of this series have been psalms that maybe include prayer. There's a part of the psalm where the psalmist is talking to God. But there's other times where they're talking to an audience. They're talking about God, but not necessarily to him. Prayer is just a piece of their psalm, their poem or song or whatever literary form it takes. But this psalm is specifically, it's entirely a prayer to God, Moses to God. And so we'll keep that in mind as we explore it. Another just interesting piece of background as we dive in, and we talked about this last week. If you missed last week's podcast, we looked at Psalm 84. I encourage you to go back and listen to that one. Psalm 84 is found in book 3 of the Psalms, and Psalm 3 contains primarily psalms of lament. So people are lamenting. They are angry, sad, sorrowful, confused. And a lot of it in book 3, those psalms deal with the fact that people are lamenting the failed dynasty of David and his house and his lineage. They could not keep the kingdom of Israel together. This political force, during David's reign and Solomon, Israel politically was a global force to be reckoned with. Just the height of their power. But now it was gone. The kingdom was divided. They've fallen. And so when book 3 of the Psalms was compiled, the people of God were really lamenting this fact that the Davidic dynasty didn't last. Human nature, human life is very frail. It's fragile. And they didn't know how to deal with it. But then we get to book 4 of the Psalms, and we start to see a solution. We see an answer. And the first psalm in book 4, Psalm 90, Moses deals with some of that.
Yeah. All right. Let's go ahead and dive into Psalm 90. I'm going to read.
Let's do it.
The whole thing. Psalm 90, not 190, verses 1 through 17. Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations, before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world. From everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You turn people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. Yet you sweep people away in the sleep of death. They are like the new grass of the morning. In the morning it springs up new, but evening it is dry and withered. We are consumed by your anger and terrified by your indignation. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your presence. All our days pass away under your wrath. We finish our years with a moan. Our days may come to 70 years or 80, if our strength endures. Yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. If only we knew the power of your anger. Your wrath is as great as the fear that is your due. Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Relent, Lord. How long will it be? Have compassion on your servants. Satisfy us in the morning with your unfailing love, that we may sing for joy and be glad all our days. Make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, for as many years as we have seen trouble. May your deeds be shown to your servants, your splendor to their children. May the favor of the Lord our God rest on us. Establish the work of our hands for us. Yes, establish the work of our hands.
One of the things that jumps out is, to me, at the very end, we'll kind of start with the end of the psalm today. Moses is asking God to help us see life the way that you see life. God, help us to see it with an eternal perspective. So he's asking God, satisfy us in the morning with your love. Help us sing for joy, that we may be glad. Even though he says, our days are afflicted, we have trouble and sorrow. We want to know how we can still find joy and be glad. Help us to show your deeds to our children, to the future generations. And then he says, establish the work of our hands. Yes, establish the work of our hands. And to me, Moses is asking God specifically, in view of who you are and in view of this very temporary life that we have, help us to make our days count. Help us not to waste this life you've given us, but to that what we do would have an eternal, lasting impact. And so what it reminded me of, and we talked a little bit about this in the message on Sunday, was just the fact that on all of our tombstones, you have a date of birth and a date of death, and then in the middle you have a dash, and that dash is our life. I actually ran across a poem. We didn't get to share it in the message this weekend, but it's a poem by Linda Ellis, and it's called The Dash. And I wanted to read just a few stanzas from this poem, since we're in the Psalms, and a lot of Psalms are poems. Thought this would be very appropriate. So more of a modern psalm or poem, if you will. But this is how part of the dash goes. It says, I read of a man who stood to speak at the funeral of a friend. He referred to the dates on the tombstone from the beginning to the end. He noted that first came the date of birth and spoke the following date with tears. But he said what mattered most of all was the dash between those years. For that dash represents all the time that they spent alive on earth. And now only those who loved them know what that little line is worth. For it matters not how much we own, the cars, the house, the cash. What matters is how we live and love and how we spend our dash.
Wow. That's really good. It reminds me of, there's this guy, John Tyson, that read a couple of his books and loved to listen to some of his sermons and stuff. But he actually talked about how he was discipling his son and trying to make certain points about the fact in his early teen years, he was like, you think you're invincible, you're going to live forever. But he really wanted to, at a young age, get his son to understand life is limited. And so he dropped them off at a cemetery and said, "Hey, I'm going to come pick you up in 30 minutes. Just walk around, make observations." So he walked around, just reflected, prayed throughout the cemetery. And when he picked up his son, he asked him, "So what did you notice?" And one of the things that he said right off the bat that he did not expect was the dash was the thing that he noticed. That there was the beginning date and the end date, but everyone had a dash in the
Yeah.
middle. And so like he actually created this hashtag from his teen years on. And so like throughout his life, he'd like different pictures on social media, things like that, would hashtag live your dash, which is super cool. And that really like, it's so true.
Yeah, I mean
Like,
that's a great reminder. Just kind of one of the main themes of this psalm. Really, a lot of
Yeah.
scripture speaks to that, and it's also a interesting father son bonding experience. I may give that a try.
for sure.
When my kids are a little older, though.
One of the things I was trying to look up earlier, and I couldn't find it, but I know it's true, so it's a fact. But I don't remember which
You
one it
saw it on
is.
the internet.
So in Judaism, the books of the Bible are written based on usually like the first word, like Genesis in the beginning. So like in Hebrew, it was like it would basically just recite the first couple words or first word. But one of those books is Bar Midbar, which means just in the desert, and it describes like the journey that obviously Moses is taking them on. And like when we were reading this and it said you have been our dwelling place, it stood out to me and it reminded me of the fact like what dwelling place did Moses ever know
Right.
other than God? Like God always provided that to the point where like they have even like this festival in Judaism called like festival of I can never pronounce it right, Sukkot or something like that, where they build these tents and things like
Yeah.
that to remember the time in the wilderness. And like it's pretty clear that like it was in the wilderness that like made them and like shaped them as a people.
Oh yeah. And you know
But that was their dash though.
yeah.
Like their dash was a wilderness.
Well, if you think about Moses' life too, you've got his early years where he's in Egypt, but then those middle 40 years before he leads God's people out, what is he doing? Well, he's this shepherd. That's kind of the dash of his life, is he's shepherding sheep. And shepherds don't stay in one place long, right? They're all over the place with that flock, caring for them, taking them to water and food and places where they're going to thrive and flourish. Shepherds don't really have a permanent home, so to speak, for most of the year.
Yeah.
And so, their homestead, their dwelling place, symbolically speaking for Moses, he's saying it's the Lord. And,
Yeah.
And so I think Moses opens the psalm with, the first half of it, he's talking about this is who God is compared to who we are. But he opens it with that idea of comfort. And he's praying this prayer, I think for himself, but also for the Hebrew people, letting them know, hey, our life is hard right now. We don't have a permanent residence. But this place is not our home.
Yeah.
Right? Our home ultimately is in our relationship with
Help
the
them
Lord.
prioritize like the relationship with God and just what was
Absolutely.
important. That's really, really good.
Yeah, and I think too, just when we look through these first several verses, Moses is describing just the nature of God, but also the nature of life on earth. And he's saying God is eternal, God is all-knowing, He's completely just. This is who God is. We're none of that, right? We are fragile creatures. We're just one breath away from death at all times.
Yeah.
Life is short. We are sinful, and so he's making this comparison, but he's also he's describing the fleeting nature of life, and so. And so we see a lot of these themes in another Old Testament book of poetry as well, like Ecclesiastes.
Yeah.
So that's attributed to Solomon, but a lot of those same themes, like life is a breath. It is
Yeah.
very short. And so I think where Moses is headed in this first half and describing this is who God is, this is who we are compared to God, is okay, we know this to be true about God. We know this to be true about humanity and human life on earth. So, what does that mean for us? What should our response be? And it'd be easy, for especially the people that Moses is leading to give up hope, right? And you see that time and time again in the desert. Oh, we left Egypt for this. Now we're just going to wander around and starve and die in the middle of this desert. And so, you probably have a lot of people asking, why, Lord? Like, why did you save us from slavery just to lead us here? And it's easy to lose sight of, I've got this dash,
Yeah.
and I've got to make it count. And so, I think Moses is working to that pivotal point that we see kind of in the middle of the psalm, where he, shifts his prayer and says, God, teach us to count our days, to number our days, so that we can have wisdom, so that we can know how to live.
It reminds me of like just when you number something and you realize how short something is, you really have to prioritize a lot. So for like example, like just in our week, like in ministry, like there's so many different things that we have to do, and prepare for messages, prepare for podcasts, prepare for like all these random things.
Yeah.
And so it's like there's certain amounts of times allotted for these things. And of course, like if we had a full 40 hours where we could just work on a message, that'd be awesome. But like that's not realistic.
Yeah.
For things to happen. So, but like in this small amount of time, especially in the busy weeks, that like you allow yourself, somehow we pull it off, like coming up with the messages in those allotted amount of times. And like I've heard people talk about like if you specify like you only have this amount of time for something and a schedule, it like and compress it down to that size, then it allows you to actually finish it in that amount of time.
Yeah.
Because like you prioritize what's important, and you're not like just like getting distracted by potentially tangents and things like that.
Right. It really is true that exercise or illustration we kind of went through in the message yesterday. And I say yesterday because it's Monday when we're recording this, but if you go back and listen to Sunday's message on Psalm 90, we just kind of put things in perspective and talk about typically if a person lives, about 77 years of age, which is kind of the life expectancy right now in our country.
Which is about what he gives in
Yeah,
verse 10.
yeah. So, if you think about that and do some math and think about how many days you have remaining, it is a very introspective exercise to start thinking about, okay, what if I only have 1,000 days left? What are my priorities? What do I want to do? What do I want to accomplish? What if I only have 100 days left? What if I'm down to a week?
Yeah.
What am I going to do then? What if I'm down
what
to
conversations you want to have.
Exactly. Yeah. What do I want to accomplish relationship wise with my family? What do I want to pass down for my kids, grandkids? Even down to like, okay, it's my last day. I have one day left. What's my priority list, right? For me, it definitely ain't mowing the lawn. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
Right? I don't even want to do that ever.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
it really does help frame things and put them into perspective.
For sure. One of the things I thought of like just while you were going through your message, and it's partially just because it's also like a buzz in the media right now too. When you were talking about like counting your days, it made me think about legacy and legacy that lasts and how we apply legacy, especially as Christians. But it reminded me of what the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is doing. He's creating this, like it's called The Line, but it's this city that's like a mega city that is like fully automated,
Oh, wow.
like ran by like solar power, like apparently like zero carbon emission whatsoever. Like it's a very innovative place that it's going to be, and like it would take like, from my understanding, like typically it would take like multiple decades to pull something like this off. But when he announced it, he said it would be done by 2030, and like they're at to the point where it's like 20% done on the infrastructure for it. Like they're actually like heading in
Wow.
that direction. And when I was thinking about that, I was like, if he pulls this off and it is what he says it is, like regardless of what you think about the guy, like he will go down in history as probably redefining how we build cities, how we do infrastructure. It it will be his legacy. Like that's what he will be remembered for. And then it made me think another thing I've thought about legacy in the past, just like battling ambition and then also like relationships and then also being a follower of Jesus, like really trying to think it through. Um, our legacy should always be tied to relationship. And like for example, like to go back to what the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is doing, like especially if it's tied to like just his glory, like that's
Yeah.
it's selfish. It's really selfish. I mean, it might be revolutionary, but it's still selfish. It's vain. But like if it's actually to serve people, that's profound. Like that's a legacy worth living.
Yeah.
And that applies to us too, like the way we live out our lives. Like how can we use our influence and our, whether small or big, our skill sets, our ability to be generous, or whatever it might be to serve people.
Yeah. It makes you think. Okay, I have this dash, right? I have a finite amount of time here on Earth. What do I want to leave behind, right? What do I want my legacy to be? And for a lot of people, Moses talks about passing down things to their children, but he's not. He doesn't say, "Hey, make sure to save up a lot of money or land, homes," or he's not talking about tangible things to pass down to children. He's saying, "May we display or show what you've done in our lives, God, to our children." So it's a lot of what Moses is talking about passing down through the work of our hands, is what we have received from God. We're passing down to future generations. That's our legacy. So it's the intangibles, like our character, the gifts and blessings of relationship that we've received from God. Like those are the things that he is envisioning here in his prayer, not the material things. And I think sometimes, if I'm honest, like when I'm thinking about my legacy, it may either be maybe a little selfishly motivated, like you're talking about, like I want to make sure people remember my name for XYZ,
Yeah.
or it might be thinking, okay, I got to make sure that I'm leaving an inheritance for my kids so that they're taken care of. That's not an evil desire, but it's not what's being talked about here in Psalm 90.
Yeah, one of the it's a very specific story I have that at the time I didn't think about it as as deep as what this psalm was talking about. But my grandparents one year for Christmas bought everybody a Bible, and most of our family, like none of us went to church at the time, and my grandparents did. I don't know if it was just after they started attending church or if it was maybe just a few years or something like that, but they decided to buy everybody a Bible. And like to be honest, I didn't know what to do with it. Like I had never owned one. I had never read one. And so like it just sat on one of my shelves. But the moments that I needed it, I then had access to the Bible for the first time in my life. Because
Yeah.
we didn't have Bible Gateway, we didn't have the app on our phone. Like I actually had to go to this physical Bible and start to guide through, like look through it. And I still didn't know how to navigate it. And then there was these moments even from like even younger years. I remember going to their house, staying the night, and she would tell Bible stories like right before bedtime. And like those little things of just passing them down, whether I wanted it or not, like it was meaningful, it was impactful, and it did shape me. It changed a
Absolutely.
lot for me.
Well, and that's when I think of legacy, right? Like, whose legacy has influenced me the most? I'm not thinking of Steve Jobs. I'm not thinking of a president from the past. I'm thinking of like godly grandparents. I'm thinking
Yeah.
of teachers who invested and poured into me. People who were in small group at church. I'm thinking of those kind of relationships that to the world may not look like they did anything worth mentioning and
Yeah.
leaving behind, but it's those people who invested in me that shaped my life. Their legacy lives on.
Yeah.
And so I think one of Moses' main points is that, like, we have a short amount of time here. And so are we going to make it count?
Yeah.
Are we going to come to the end of our life and say, that we are leaving behind something that's worth leaving behind? And he mentions that even in, some of the language, we didn't get into depth in the message over the weekend, but he's talking about, God's anger and indignation and just his ability to expose our sin and his power, his wrath. And so even in that, I think what Moses is trying to convey is the fact that what we do here matters. And the good matters, the bad matters. We're going to be judged. One day we're going to stand before God. God is going to, because he is holy, because he's righteous, we're going to be judged with what we do for the number of days that he's allotted to us. Now, ultimately, as New Testament Christians, we know that the biggest thing that matters for us is, what did we do with Jesus while we were here on earth?
Yeah.
Did we trust in him? Did we surrender our lives to him and follow him? I'm thankful I'm not going to be held accountable
Yeah.
or punished and suffer consequences for my sin. Jesus took those on the cross.
Yeah.
But there is still this element of, one day we're going to stand before the judge, and we're going to have to give an account for what we did with what we've been given. And in this case specifically, Moses is saying, for the days you've been given.
Yeah.
So some people get more than others. That's totally in God's hands and up to him. What God is specifically going to be looking for is, hey, I gave you a certain number of days. Did you use those on yourself, or did you use those to invest in eternity?
One of the ways I was trying to think through, like, how can we really make this practical? How can we help people figure out how to implement this? And one of the things I was thinking about was the idea of a bucket list, but like you mentioned earlier when we were talking, like a non-material bucket list.
Yeah.
So not let's go skydiving. That's fine if that's on your bucket list. I'm not opposed to that. But what I'm talking about is
there's a chance you may have less days if you go skydiving. There.
If you knew that you only had so many days left, which all of us have numbered days. If we're doing what Moses says here, we have a certain number of days.
Yeah. So
we need to live as if we do, and be intentional about every single waking moment that we have, and spend time on things that matter. Maybe that means more time with the family. Maybe that means more time investing in the next generation. I'm a little biased because I'm a student minister. Maybe it means investing in the elderly. Maybe, to reverse that. But there's so many things or things that you wish you would have, a particular skill set that you had that you wish you would have invested into other people with, and thought that other people could have benefited from. There's so many things. Just write a list, 3 to 5 things that you wish you could have done, and go do those things. Prioritize those things over making money, even.
Yeah. And yeah, to add to the conversation you and I had, so it's not the idea of, I want to go skydiving, mountain climbing, Rocky Mountain climbing, 2.7 seconds on a bull named Fu Manchu, Tim McGraw. So it's not that idea, but it's do the things that help you become the person you want to be, to have the godly character that you desire. Now, and one thing that we discussed as well is, what about the people who say, all right, like, I don't have that many days left. Is it too late for me? Right? How can I do what Moses is talking about here when I'm down to just my last few days, you know?
I've had this question a lot, especially as a student minister. I'll have like individuals who are in their bonus years, as you put, 77 plus, that like they might have a bad knee, or they're afraid they might not have the energy to work with middle schoolers. That's
Right.
fine.
They're
Like,
not jumping in the dodgeball games.
You don't need to be jumping into the dodgeball game. That's totally fine. It's understandable. There are plenty of things that you can do to like serve others, or like just open up your house for a cup of coffee with someone, which I'm sure most individuals in their bonus years would love that type of conversation. There's so many things you can learn. Like, share those stories.
Yeah.
Share lessons you've learned.
And really, that's what we're seeing here in Psalm 90.
Yeah.
Moses is in his bonus years, right? He's probably older than anybody you or I know at this point. I mean, he's well over 100, and he's still asking the question, God, please teach me to number my days, and so that I can have wisdom to know how to live them well. And so he never viewed it as, oh, it's too late for me. And if anybody could have, it could have been Moses. I mean, Moses he had murdered somebody when he was younger. He had already disobeyed God and kind of been kept, from entering the promised land. If anybody could have just given up and said, it's too late for me, it could have been Moses, but he didn't. He realized, man, while I'm still in my dash, I'm going to live that for the Lord as well as I possibly can.
I love that. Super good.
Yep.
That's Psalm 90. Do you have any other thoughts you'd like to add to it?
I think just one of the things that kept popping out to me is that Moses says, yes, this life is short. This life is very difficult. We experience pain and sorrow. We may feel like homeless nomads wandering. We don't really belong here. Part of that is true. We don't belong here. Our home is with the Lord in heaven. The New Testament says we are citizens of heaven. That's where our citizenship is. And so we keep that in mind as we travel this life. But he also keeps coming back to this request he asks of God, which is satisfy us, help us to find enjoyment. It's not all gloom and doom for him. Even in the twilight years of his life, he's saying we can still have joy because of who God is and because we know he's with us.
Just a specific point on that. Like, this past weekend we had the big Independence Day celebration, and there were several older people, and even people around my age, that saw the water balloon fight we had, and they were like, just seeing that brought me so much joy. And it's okay to have fun. Like, this isn't like be overly serious. Like, when I became a Christian, like, I thought it was all serious. And like, sometimes it is like making a water balloon fight for the next generation to have a blast on church property. Like, that's incredible. But yeah,
love it.
That just came to mind. But yeah.
Good time. Psalm
Cool.
90 and water balloons, folks.
Yep. So if you are in the area and you don't have a local church, we would love to have you stop by, hang out with us on a Sunday morning. We meet Sunday mornings, 10 a.m. right here at Sardinia Church of Christ. Otherwise, you can follow us on social media. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on YouTube. Otherwise, we'll see you next week for the next psalm.